Hi, everybody. Sorry, we're starting a minute or so late. Welcome to yet another edition of the GenWise Education Adda. These are basically conversations between experts, educators, and parents on topics and issues concerning children and learning. Now, in previous editions of the Adda, we've touched upon topics such as motivation and choice as they apply to learning, the importance of interdisciplinarity, etc. And all of these are founded upon a very important component, which is the emotional state and the conditioning of the child, and how the learning environment supports this emotional well-being. From a scientific perspective, I believe we understand quite a lot about the child's developing brain in relation to its environment. However, much of it may not have sifted through to educators and parents, which brings us to today's topic, which is empowering children to deal with negative emotions. We have familiar faces in our expert panel, Dr. Bhushan Shukla, child and adolescent psychiatrist. Dr. Shukla conducts workshops for educators and parents very regularly as well, apart from his practice. Radha Gopalan, environmental scientist
Hi.
turned educator. Radha has taught courses in sustainability at Rishi Valley School, which is a residential school, for several years. Soumya wears the parent hat today on the panel. And more about our panel at the links in the chat window that I'll paste shortly. As always, the session lasts for 45 minutes and our panelists will share their introductory thoughts for about 10 to 15 minutes, followed by Q&A and other conversations. To kick off our session, I'd like Radha and Soumya to first share their opening observations on this topic, wearing your respective hats, that of an educator and a parent. Radha or Soumya?
Soumya, go ahead as a parent,
Thanks.
and then I will take it.
Thanks, Raja. Thanks, Radha. Yeah. So I think as a parent, one would like to see children sort of engaged and happy and positive and being able to state their dissatisfaction, comfortably and conveniently. Not in the middle of a supermarket on the floor kind of thing. But I think often children across the ages seem to end up being bored sometimes, demotivated, unhappy, uncooperative, quarrelsome, getting into conflicts, taking the easy way out, so to speak, and doing just enough, perhaps not stretching themselves. One senses as a parent, at least one senses that they don't stretch beyond that, that grade or that mark in the book, exam, assignment, and get driven by the external locus of approval and performance measures rather than their internal, song that they should probably sing. So I think these are worrisome, and of course, in these times of the lockdown, everything is intensified more for most children. So I think these would be some of the concerns, typical. That's what I think. Radha, how do you see it, having been with children at the, the other end of the tables,
Right.
sort of, yeah.
Right. Yeah, as a lot of what you've said, but also particularly in a residential school or, in an environment which is where children are with you for about 8 months of the year. So you really see them going through this gamut of emotional conditions and situations. And of course, it varies across ages. And you also carry some children right from, say, 4th grade to 12th grade, and you see the shifts in these kind of emotions. But I think one of the things as an adult who was on the campus with children, one of the first things I sort of that strikes me in this context is how does one build resilience, because children will go through these processes, right? I mean, like all of us human beings go through it. So children, particularly when they're away from home, the emotional state is definitely more fragile in some of the children, or when they feel down and out, or when both academically, if there's a problem, if they don't get along with the teacher, if if they feel that they don't have anybody to talk to on the campus, for instance, or in a school environment or back in the hostel, right? I mean, how do they, the yo-yoing that happens, or the kind of ups and downs that one goes through in a day, over a period of time, what happens? How does one deal with that, right? And as an adult, I think one of the things is, how does one build resilience in children so that they're able to actually deal with it? And another element of this aspect of what we look at as negative emotions is also we as adults, as say a house parent or a teacher, how do I sense these early warning signs? What is a negative emotion really? What is a deeper negative emotion? What is a more something that will pass? Where do I just sort of let it go and say this will pass? This is something that we all go through. But there's a deeper negative emotion which may stem from many things. And it may stem from your home environment, something that has happened at home. The child has had a call from home, So any of those, right? So these are two things. One is building the resilience, and the other is as a teacher, as an adult, as a house parent there, how do I see these early warning signs before the negative emotion transforms into something that cannot be, that can be difficult and really kind of dangerous as well. Yeah. These are some of the things that I had. Yes.
Thanks, Samya and Radha. Dr. Bhushan, it would be great if you could share some of your introductory thoughts on a framework for how to understand as also to respond to this whole area.
Thank you, Rajesh, and thanks, Radha and Soumya. This does get a bit complicated if you want to make it, because see, our title itself is about negative emotions, and I as a practicing psychiatrist, as someone who studies mind and brain continuously, feel that maybe I suggested a wrong title. It should just be about emotions. Because the negative and the positive part really depends on the outcome. We are essentially talking about emotion, and maybe we'll have to start up with educating ourselves about emotions in the first place. The traditional view of emotion as being something bad. When you say emotion, it is very rarely a positive connotation that goes with that word. It is invariably taken as something negative. And so that is where I think we'll have to correct ourselves. It's an evolutionary mechanism of reaction where we can appraise the situation very, very rapidly. So it is essentially a flag that is being set up there with 4 billion years of evolution. And we cannot simply throw it away or call it stupid or unnecessary or harmful. It's a very robust mechanism that has survived through 4 billion years. So that is the first part, that these are indicators for us. That is something that we really need to remember. Like engine in a car, you cannot throw out the engine or declare it to be redundant. That will take away the whole function of the car. Do we have a control system on that? And can we fine tune that control system better is something that we should be really looking at. And again, using the same simile of an engine of a car, they come in various varieties and they come in pre-fit in. You don't get to change the engine. So you don't know whether you have an old diesel burner or you have a F1 fitted, a V12 fitted in there. So only thing that probably you can change is control system with its inherent limitations that come with control systems. So I think this wider understanding is definitely needed before we talk about emotions altogether. Let us not expect emotions to disappear anytime in next 4 billion years. By Lindy effect, something that has lasted for so long will last so much longer again. So let's be ready with that. Second part is about what you said is where do we take it practically? Where do we see this being flagged up or not to be flagged up? So the patterns of emotions are to be analyzed at what is the intensity of a particular emotion. That is something that is important for us. Second is how long does that emotion last? So that also becomes quite important. So one is intensity, one is duration of the emotion. Third is the pattern, that does the person have a typical trigger pattern of certain emotions or combinations of emotions related to certain triggers. And the last part will be what do they do with those emotions? So all these 4 parameters will decide how that emotion works for that one particular person. And any advice to parents or teachers should be based on all of this. Unless all 4 factors are taken into consideration, going by any one factor, by just intensity, by just the type or the trigger of the emotion, or just the behavior, or just the duration, will lead us in the wrong direction altogether.
Thank you, Doc. Is there anybody with any comments or questions as we open this topic up a little further? Please feel free to write it down or speak out and ask your questions or share your thoughts. Now, in the absence of, I'll let you a couple more minutes to think about what's on your mind. Doc, one of the things, I think what Soumya and Radha, they gave a couple of examples, right? I mean, Radha, you gave examples of peer pressure and so on. I mean, I think we can dig a little deeper under that as well. There are so many sources of that peer pressure. Soumya, you spoke about boredom and stuff like that. In terms of the overall health of the child, Doc, I mean, what are the sort of stresses that one should be aware of? For example, the child itself may be born with that engine, like you said, to an extent, right? And then there is the demand from the environment. I mean, I think you had some thoughts around it yesterday. If you could just share a little bit more about how do we categorize these sorts of sources of emotion?
Sure. Rajesh, the thing, as a doctor, as a psychiatrist, I look at the difficulties appearing and them converting to mental health issues in a slightly different way. One is that what does the child bring to the table? By child, I mean their developmental experiences and their developmental potential. So there are some children who will have developmental difficulties which are built into their brain. They are born with that. They could be fostered by environment. They could be entirely genetic or developmental, as we call them. It is wrong to punish the parents and children for that difficulty. That definitely needs to be identified and labeled as such. Because taking that burden away from parents and from the child as well is one of the most difficult things, and very important as well. Look at intellectual deficiency, or look at hyperactivity, or autism-like developmental difficulty, or speech and language difficulties. These are all built in when they come in, and it is not correct to blame people for this. So that is one part. Second is a child who is showing normal reactions, but they are being misunderstood by the environment. So these are normal developmental needs of the child, but the family or the system in which the child is growing up has some very narrow requirements or narrow expectations. So even the normal range of normality starts appearing abnormal for them. So it is mislabeling that the child undergoes. A third is a child who is decompensating with what we can call as a normal stress. So the vulnerability in the child is such that even the so-called normal stress is decompensating for the child. And the last one is where you are looking at exceptional situations which will overwhelm anybody's normal defense mechanisms. You know, for example, a child who coming through parental divorce, or a child experiencing exceptional trauma by way of loss in the family, or some very severe illness that they have faced. And then you will see signs of decompensation. So one has to realize where it is coming from so that our help can be directed in an appropriate way.
Radha, could you share some examples about where the child is normal, but there is a demand from an environment, or it's a perfectly normal need where it could be mislabeled or presented as an abnormality, from your experience at Rishi Valley?
I think there's also a couple of questions, sorry.
Yeah, there are. I think before I go, Rajesh, I just saw a couple of questions. I think might be useful to address those before we take examples.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think this topic is so vast that 45 minutes is probably seriously inadequate, and there is a very high risk that we will be entering a cul-de-sac and staying there. So I apologize to all the viewers right in the beginning that this may happen with us, and please bear with us because of the vastness of the topic.
That's right.
Right, Doc, if you're not able to see these chat questions, and Radha and Soumya, there's one question that says, what is the best way to bring up a sensitive and moralistic child in an environment which is becoming increasingly aggressive, bullying from peers, essentially.
I think I would like to hear from Radha also about this, because Radha has faced this situation for a very long time in residential school.
So this issue of bullying. I mean, before I think I'll take the previous question as well that Rajesh you were talking about, and that could lead to this issue of aggression from peers. Okay, so this is a very classic situation that we have experienced with girls, particularly. Okay, that's one example, where after a point, academically extremely bright girls, gifted, and really sort of good at what they do, very confident. And then they reach a point in their lives when they're about maybe 15, 16 or something. And then they start retreating into a shell or sort of, the word that's used often, and this has happened in practice, is dumbing themselves down. So sort of pretending to be, not these bright young girls. And, when we've had these discussions in school, it's always been about, we don't want to appear like nerds. We don't want to appear smarter than the boys. Otherwise, we don't get attention from the boys, right? That's one classic thing. And in all residential schools, this is a big problem. This whole relationship between boys and girls, the sexuality of the children. And because, like we were talking yesterday, and Bhushan was saying that, the age group between the teachers and the students is so vast that even perception and understanding of many of these things are very different, and the approaches are very different. So what is seemingly a hormonal or an age-related, just a very normal response, is perceived to be this problem, and then how do we deal with this problem? And people then begin to approach it very differently. Some people look at it as, we need to build more confidence in the girls, and other people look at it as, oh, maybe we need to talk to the boys. So there is, as opposed to, can we just understand that this might be a normal process? This is something very, very normal. There's just one other example that I wanted to share is, and I want to talk about bullying more so. Bullying can be very subtle. It doesn't have to be overt aggression at all. Bullying can be in the form of, for example, even something very straightforward as a group of children getting together, forming their own little clique, not allowing others to be part of it. That is very much, that is a very subtle kind of bullying, because saying you are not us, you are different from us. And that can also create an emotional situation in many children. And this has happened, and as we were talking yesterday, one example was where children, who came from homes where their parents were separated, they had formed their little clique, but they were very vocal, and they were the what everybody wanted to be in class. And they would sort of very subtly eliminate people they didn't want in their group by saying, you're not like us. Our parents are separated, so we are different from you. So using that as a differentiator to exclude. So this inclusion-exclusion dance that happens among children, that's another and that can have varied impacts on other children.
Right.
I think
how do you identify these? How do you react and respond to these? How do you support the child in these situations?
And I think, Bhushan, this is where,
Right.
I wanted to sort of get your ideas on it, because how do, as teachers for us, some of us went through training, just to see those initial signals, to understand simple things like, if a child who draws in a particular way, who's an art student, changes what he or she draws, that's also a sign, things like that. But so very, very small things. But I'm sure with your experience with, teenagers, you would have a lot of ways by which some of this can be flagged and seen.
Yeah. So thanks, Radha. It's really a difficult one, to be very honest, because the range of normality is really quite wide. One child, in the same family, if there are two kids, and if they are at the two ends of normal spectrum, they may appear very abnormal to each other, or even to parents. And I think this is important to remember, that range of normality is really quite wide, and it goes on narrowing through the lifespan. That is why most of the senior citizens pretty much look like each other. You know, because the flexibility of your brain, the plasticity of your brain decreases. And that is the basic neurobiological reason why variations are so wide in younger children. So it is important to remember that as well. Second is that when we see these difficulties, children going through emotional turmoil, I'm not talking about the diagnostic category here right now, because I think diagnosis takes the discussion in a very different direction altogether. Let us talk about it as a normal human distress by somebody who is facing a difficult situation or a difficult life position. So my take is there are three areas in which I want to stay focused while working with this child. One is helping them assimilate those emotions. That labeling the emotion, identifying the emotion is very important, but at the same time, normalizing experience of that emotion is also very important. That no matter how intense that emotion is, and just today there was this discussion on Twitter with Sandeep Gautam, who's one of the faculties with GenWise, and Suvikas Bhandari. What do you do with these negative emotions? So there are no negative and positive emotions really. There are emotions. They are helpful and sometimes they are unhelpful. That is what they really are. That is a more useful categorization as far as I go. So normalizing experience of that emotion is first thing that I want to do for the child. Second thing that I want to do for that child is expand their horizon and give them a sense of how deep time really is. Because the education system, parents, and the adolescence itself makes things very instant. That if you are unable to perform now, in this year, in these 2 years, you know, various stages are labeled as this is really very crucial year. I think the only crucial year is the few minutes when you are born and the few minutes when you die. And in between that, there is a really long stretch of time about which we really don't understand anything at all. So giving them that depth of time, that this is not the end of the world. There is hope beyond that. So I think emotions on one side and hope on the other side is a good balance to have for the child. And the third angle that I would like to focus on by way of counseling, and I'm using counseling as a very, very broad generic term here. Any adult who's trying to help the child should be using that term there, is about learning skills to deal with that difficult situation. So it may be assertiveness skill, it may be a good expression skill, it may be trying to get help from others, that kind of skill. It may be trying to focus or defocus on certain things. So these are practical skills. It may be something as simple as learning to use relaxation techniques. So the simple skills that child can use to cope with that situation. So normalization of emotion, increasing the frame or the depth of the frame for the child, giving them adequate time and hope. And third is learning necessary skills at that point of time, is something that can really help them deal with these difficult times, difficult emotions.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for that, Dr. Radha. You were going to say something, Radha?
Yeah, I was going to say that's been our experience actually. That's exactly been our experience with many children. When you work with them, of course, first coming from a place of compassion and as an adult, not being judgmental right then and there, but also working with children collectively to develop relaxation, breathing, things like that have actually been very helpful in the environment where I was. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So here's another question to the panel. In my experience, acknowledging the built-in deficiencies has led to it becoming an excuse for not wanting to do anything about it at all. How do I handle this?
So the deficiency part, as we call it, is again very, very time sensitive. Something that may appear as a deficiency may not necessarily be a deficiency. Let me take an extreme example to illustrate this. Our society, which is getting increasingly what I call as Americanized, where everybody should have leadership qualities, everybody should have speaking skills and convincing. Essentially, everybody should be a car salesman, is what, that too second-hand car salesman. That's what we are driving towards. A child who is more thoughtful, who's more deliberate, who's more careful, who does not like to be on the stage and be Shah Rukh Khan all the time, is actually seen as somebody seriously abnormal or troubled for a very long time. These children actually come into their own and are able to prove their value to the society well into their 30s or 40s even. So this is something that I think we must keep in mind, that what we call as deficiency, unless it is a serious biologically driven difficulty that the child has built in, a disability, like say autism, where emotional skills are going to be seriously less, or intellectual deficiency, or a learning disability where the reading and writing of the child is going to get hampered. All other things have to be looked at as a coin with two sides, or a medicine which has side effects and which has its own effective ways of helping the person as well. Can we turn it around? Can we have not just a positive spin, because that is again using the marketing lingo? Can we see the upside of that quality? That is something that is quite important. Somebody who has a very mathematical mind and is able to see patterns in things is going to fail miserably on our language and biology and chemistry assessments. We have to be ready for that, that every ability will come with its own cost. And helping the child to adjust with that, helping the family to understand that, is something that is really important.
Thank you for that. There's a few more questions that have come up. Doc, there are requests for some book suggestions. You did mention that this is a very vast topic, so there are people requesting for suggestions for books they can read over the course of this session, or maybe even afterwards. If you can share a couple of ideas, we can share it with others. There's a more specific question here. Kids go to various friends' houses, watch movies, cartoons where they're exposed to negative emotions. How do we ensure they do not apply it to themselves?
So that's I think a bigger parenting issue that a lot of parents are struggling with, and you know, there is this intense desire that's part of our parenting, that's part of our evolutionary makeup, where we want to minimize the downside of life for children and maximize the upside for every child that we have. And parents do make extreme effort to do that. Parents go to inordinate lengths to do that, and I don't blame them for that. That's our mechanism. I just want to tell them that this effort, which takes a lot of time, money, and energy, this project has been run to almost perfection by one king. He tried to keep his son away from the negative effects of the world for a very long time. Though we do not have resources like that king had, we do end up having outcome like that king had. His son actually eventually did face the negativities in life and became the guiding light for the whole world and came to be known as Gautama the Buddha. You know, the Siddhartha was transformed into Gautama by that experience. So I think I don't know whether that story is true or not, but I think there is a lesson for me there as a parent that I cannot, with all my might, expect my child to be shielded from this, nor can I attempt to counteract entire influence of the world on my child. I have to have the flexibility of the reed, that no matter how the current flows, my roots are strong enough to hold me to survive in this. This may sound very philosophical, but at a practical level, there are so many changes happening. There are so many influences happening there, that my only bulwark against harm for that child is to make sure that my parental relationship, my family relationship is really deep-rooted and emotional with that child. It is not outcome-based, but it is process-based. It is based on the basic values that I have in my family for my child and for my relationship with them. And that relationship for me is the most important thing, not the outcome. Not how my child scores over like 6 months or what words my child uses over next 6 months or 1 year, but is my relationship strong enough to help the child weather this storm till they become independent themselves? That is what I would stay focused on as a parent.
Okay, Rajesh, I have a comment if I may.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, you know, this was triggered by Bhushan's reference to, you know, being philosophical. So I just wanted to bounce it off him, that in my experience as a parent, I found two things to be enormously helpful. Of course, it's easy to say and easy to sort of do in small bits here and there. The trick is to sustain it, which is that one must relinquish this desire for control. A, and B, the more aware one is of one's own emotions and one's own sort of coordinates as a person, somehow it seems to ease things up so, so unexpectedly. You think I'm only doing something to myself, but the situation just sort of frees itself from any tension. So perhaps this is some very well-known thing. I don't know. I'm just sharing my sort of experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, Soumya, that there are, and I hope our listeners take this in the right spirit and not throw their digital shoes at me, that there are two dominant emotions, very unhelpful emotions, which can interfere with parenting. One is the fear that something will go wrong and my child will not reach his or her potential. That is one bit. And second is, for lack of better word, it's greed. That you want more and more and more for your child all the time, completely forgetting that children have their own life path and desires as well. And you, Soumya, I think you are very correct in saying that if the desire of control, I would go one step further and say this is desire for living a second life. And again, to quote mythology, we do have a story there. I think it is Yayati who tried to get the youth from his son and try to live a life again. And we all know from mythology that all these arrangements and efforts ultimately end up in terrible tragedies for the whole nation. Yeah. So it is important to realize that we have one life and we have to live that, and children have also one life and they have to live that. That is something that is quite important. Though I do want to say something to reduce that fear, if that is possible. That fear which drives a lot of parenting, that if your child has decent intellectual abilities, and I'm sure all parents believe this in their heart that my child is intelligent. And second part is that if they have decent social skills, your child has a good future. Exactly when will that future materialize and will it be encashable, as most parents want to know? Is something that nobody can know. Nobody can answer that. I hear a lot of parents saying that, even if you have to become a sweeper in municipality, that is fine, but be the best sweeper there is. I think that's a wrong way of going about it. There is no competition for best sweeper anywhere in the world. And second thing is that when parents say that I want you to be the best sweeper, what they actually mean is that it doesn't matter if you're a sweeper, but you need to be a millionaire. When parents say best, they are essentially talking about a 7-8 figure bank balance. And unless we somehow see this hypocrisy in ourselves and address that at a deeper level, it is very difficult to be a parent to a child growing up in 21st century with this storm around them. It's very, very, very challenging.
Right. And there was a related point about how do I control or how do I moderate or regulate the amount of screen time for my child. I guess it probably goes back to the earlier example, Soumya, you were talking about, I want to do something. I mean, Doc, you've spent a lot of time online on Twitter and elsewhere talking about the downsides of screen time, etc. So there is a question about how the child does not want to set any limits for the time he's involved in playing online video games.
Yeah. I think here I'm going to sound completely opposite of what I sounded till now. And I want to take that risk because parenting is about handling these contrasting things at the same time. So something that I know is very clearly harmful for my child. Let's say like a bottle of alcohol left open in the living room when I have my 13-year-old sitting there. Screen time I would compare to that. And that is where I would definitely draw a line as a parent. My model of parenting is that I'm absolutely intolerant in a very, very small area. And I'm very, very liberal and accepting in remaining all wide areas there. I choose my areas of intolerance very carefully. And I apply myself 100% to that. Like I would not allow my 13-year-old to drive a motorized vehicle, the illegal activity. I would not allow my 18-year-old to drink alcohol because it is illegal in the country and I know it is dangerous at that point of time. I would put screen time exactly in the same category. The harms of excessive screen time are so well documented all over the world that if a parent says that I cannot control my child's screen time, then the child needs to be in a rehabilitation center. I'm willing to take such a severe and extreme stand on that, because there are numerous studies which say that screen time, zero screen time is harmful for the child in the 21st century. But anything beyond 2 hours in a day is also equally harmful and even more devastating. So if the child is not able to use that privilege with responsibility, it is my responsibility as a parent to take away that privilege and deal with the consequences. The fear is my child will get angry, my child will be disrupted from me. The relationship, beautiful relationship that Dr. Shukla was talking about just 2 minutes ago, will be thrown out of the window and all of that. I think there is a small area where I want to be absolutely intolerant to this so-called personal freedom of unlimited screen time.
Thanks, Doc. But isn't there a small difference between consuming stuff on the screens versus actively playing games?
Sorry, I lost your connection there, but can you please, somebody who heard the question, can you please repeat that for me?
Yeah, he said that,
would you consider that equally negative?
Rajesh, we lost you for a bit, so maybe you can.
Doc, I was basically saying that.
Yeah,
can you guys hear me?
Yeah. So I got a gist of the question. See, I put this children who use a lot of screen time in 3 broad categories again. One is the watchers, who just watch endless amount of videos on the screen. Okay, these may be just YouTube videos, entertainment, music, or even there is a subcategory who watch games on YouTube. So there are known gamers all over the world who have their YouTube channels, and I can never cross level 5 in that game, but I would want to watch somebody who's going to level 45 and 74 in that game, and I watch those videos, which is equivalent to pornography in adults. Stuff that I can never do myself in life. I see other people doing that and somehow feel gratification in that. Okay, so that is the same as pornography. So these are watchers. Then there are social media enthusiasts who are constantly on various medias interacting with other people and assessing their response to oneself. And third group are the gamers who actually play. Now, all of these things are fine as long as you put a boundary around it and see to it that your time, your effort, and your emotions are actually not being stretched beyond a point, because all 3 have their serious harms. And that is where you have to identify which category your child sits into, because these 3 positions are reached through 3 very different emotional states.
Got it.
The watchers are going there for entertainment, but going there with a deep sense of low self-esteem, where they just feel happy watching other people do that, but never attempt doing anything themselves. The gamers are the one who are there for the thrill of it, and that is the most addicting thing. And the social media guys are there again, going there to get validation in some way or other. So which again comes from a position of self-esteem, but from a different attempt at that. Right. So identifying that and helping the child sort that out is something that is really important.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have about 5 minutes to go before we end the session. There's 2 or 3 observations around regulation of emotion, self-regulation, families regulating emotions, etc. And then, Doc, one more thing that, all of you on the panel, one more thing that I'd like you to talk about before we close is, the impact of this whole lockdown. Is there something that we can do to support parents and educators around the emotional state of children? Just your thoughts, please.
Yeah, so I think it has been a trying time, I think, because I think people are used to going out. Students and parents alike, children and parents alike, used to stepping out as a way of not sorting out issues at home. So now that that release is not possible, and so you have to sort things out. So I think I know families where things have actually improved after getting worse initially. So that has been my sort of observation. But I know other families where things are extremely intense. Also, yeah, that's what I have to say. Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I think one of the main things that really has troubled me a lot with this whole lockdown thing is the online education aspect of it. I'm trying to just get my head around how do you, how do you ensure, one is of course the inequity part of it, which has created a lot of emotional and mental situations for young children all over the country and all over the world as well. But, I just to go back to what Bhushan said earlier, that we've taken this thing so seriously, this need to have those classes, because if that syllabus is not covered, then that child, so it's like everything is set in stone, as opposed to taking this opportunity to understand that timeline that you talked about, Bhushan, between the time of birth and the time of death, and really sort of step back, and both as parents and as teachers, I mean, and the entire system, but even as parents, I think some choices can be made about saying no to getting on to some of these online courses. So for me, that has really been an issue that, I mean, there's no easy answer, but that is something that I've struggled with as well. Yes.
Doc, if you could close with your thoughts on this as well as on the regulation of emotion comment, please.
Yeah, so just a quick one about lockdown. I think Soumya and Radha both have pointed out very correct things, and I agree with them 100%. One small group that also I want to mention is that there are children who have thrived in lockdown. They are very happy to be home, exploring by themselves, getting their independence, not facing their classmates and the rigid school structures on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of excessive socialization as well. If you are a parent who has a child who has been really happy and comfortable in lockdown, this is a time for you to introspect, understand why your child is there. Is it because they are so asocial? I'm not using the word antisocial, which is very commonly used in India, and it is a completely wrong word. So asocial, they are not pro-social, they are asocial, they are away, they don't like so much of exposure. And if they are happy that way, then understanding your child's strengths and probably charting further path, which uses these strengths to their best effect, is something that parents need to remember as well. And about concluding, I would say that, again, let me repeat what I said right in the beginning, that let us look at emotions as just the red, green, and orange signal there in the panel. Let us not put a value to that. Let's just say whether they are helpful or not helpful, are they go or no go, or drive slowly and carefully kind of signals for us. Let us learn to identify them, accept them, put a proper steering wheel, initially in the family with demonstration of handling emotions by parents themselves. And on the other hand, if the child is really struggling with it, then giving them concrete professional help as well, if it is needed, and helping them, turn this engine to their best advantage instead of it just fluttering and misfiring all the time.
Great, that's very well put.
We are on the minute. It's time to wind up. Thank you everybody for so candidly sharing your questions and taking the time out to come and share in these conversations. To the panelists, thank you so much for your insights and experiences. We have another Adda coming up next week. I think we're probably doing another too frequently. So from next month onwards, we're likely to have a couple of Addas a month. But do remember to tune in next week, where we're going to discuss about experiential learning. So I will send you more details through the course of the week. Thanks once again, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Rajesh, can you stop the Facebook live stream?
Yes, I've done that.